Just how can you know what your genetic potential for muscle growth is, anyways? Is it through what your bone structure looks like? Is it through what your muscle shape and symmetry looks like? Is it what your base level of strength is? If you're someone who's been lifting weights for a while, this might be something that you've wondered. And if you're someone who's been thinking about getting started with lifting weights to build muscle, then it might be too. It is, after all, hard not to wonder what the answer to that question is when you either are now or will be spending your time and energy on the process of building muscle. From my experience lifting weights consistently for over 20 years, working as a physique coach for the past 7 years, and competing as a natural bodybuilder for the past 7 years as well, I've learned a lot on the topic. The answers that I've found aren't as straightforward or as black and white as a lot of people might think or claim. And as such, many people make what I believe are wrongful assumptions of what their own genetic potential for muscle growth is. In this video, while showing you footage from my latest full body gym workout, I'm going to share with you what I've learned about assessing your genetic potential for muscle growth and what I think many people get wrong about it. My hope is that it might give you some clarity as to what your genetic potential for muscle growth might be, or at the very least, help point you in the right direction. Before we get started, if you find this video to be helpful, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. It really helps me out. Okay, let's dive in. From what I've learned, your genetic potential ought to be assessed from more than just your starting pre-trained body structure. And by starting pre-trained body structure, I'm talking about your bone structure, base level of muscle mass, and your starting muscular shape and symmetry. While those are undoubtedly a part of the puzzle, albeit a very important part, they aren't the only part. And through assessing your genetic potential from those variables alone, you might come to the wrongful conclusion as they're truly just one piece of the puzzle. No, there are other variables that need to be considered. And it's these other variables that I've seen many people overlook, starting with this first big, broad one: time. One of the most common mistakes people seem to make when trying to assess their own genetic potential is aiming to make an assessment too soon, based on not enough experience or time in the trenches. In some cases, far too soon. See, you could have what looks like average or even a below average pre-trained body structure that actually has the genetic potential to build an exceptional, even above average amount of muscle with great symmetry and structure, if you give it enough time. For some people, this can start to show relatively early into lifting weights, which for them might be an indicator that they do have great genetic potential, absolutely. But for others, they might have great potential too, but it might just take longer to see it. For example, some people might start to see significant improvements to their physique within a few months of lifting, while others, it might take several or more years to start seeing them, but they are there. For the latter group, the potential is there, but it just takes more time to see it. This one really hits home for me personally. As of now, speaking from a place of attempted humility, I have a physique that looks like it has above average genetics. But what many people don't know is that for the first 10 years or so of lifting, you couldn't even really tell I lifted weights. For one, my starting body structure wasn't particularly exceptional by any means. It wasn't below average, but it wasn't above average either. I looked like just another person. It wasn't until after I had been lifting consistently for many years that my potential really began to show. And funny enough, despite not initially seeming to be the cream of the crop genetically, it turned out that my physique is actually what could probably be considered above average now. And I'm still improving too. I would even argue that I'm getting into the coolest part of making progress towards my genetic potential as I aim to improve from one natural bodybuilding season to the next. 20 years into lifting, and I definitely haven't hit my genetic ceiling. A common mistake people mistake when assessing their own physiques is that they do so just too early. If they don't see significant signs of potential within weeks, months, or even a few years sometimes, they write themselves off far too early. But what I've learned is that sometimes it can just take years of consistently sticking with the process before getting a more true and accurate idea of what your genetic potential might actually be. That's definitely been the case for me. The second often overlooked variable is your level of quality and consistency when it comes to the muscle growth process. The muscle growth process largely referring to how you train and how you eat. From what I've seen, it's common for people to write off their genetics as being not so great, not because they actually have poor genetics or genetics that are worse than they think they are, but because the means in which they work out and eat is what's poor. In other words, they get unimpressive results not because of their genetics, but because they aren't lifting and eating well without realizing it. For example, you might hear someone say they don't have the best lower body muscle because of their genetics, but without them realizing it, they don't have the best leg muscle simply because they don't train their legs efficiently. They squat and leg press, sure, but they do so with poor control, a shortened range of motion, and through taking their sets further away from failure than they think they are. Naturally, it would be the suboptimal leg training that would lead to lackluster results in that circumstance, not through having unimpressive genetics. The same could hold true when it comes to a person's diet. A person could train with good technique and to a close proximity of failure most of the time, but still see lackluster results, which could be mistaken from poor genetics. But again, it might not be much related to their genetics, if in fact it's because they're eating a poor diet. This overlooked variable is incredibly common from what I've seen. Alas, I would make sure not to write off your genetics if you haven't been training and eating properly. Check that first. The third overlooked variable is adopting an inaccurate perspective of what good or bad genetics is through regularly being exposed to fitness influencers and bodybuilders on social media who either A, have the cream of the crop top 0.1% genetics in the world, B, who are taking performance-enhancing drugs, or C, who have a combination of the cream of the crop genetics and are taking PEDs. Comparing yourself to them just isn't helpful when it comes to making much of an accurate assessment of your own genetic potential. If you aren't the same as them, as in you don't have the same kind of ultra well-developed physique, it doesn't mean you have bad genetics. It just means you don't have the top 0.01%, or that you aren't taking PEDs, or you aren't someone taking PEDs with the top 0.01% of genetics simultaneously. See, you might actually have great genetics, or, at the very least, above average genetics, or perhaps have certain features on your physique that are genetically above average. Myself, for example, I have what I suspect could be considered above average arm genetics, but my ab genetics are pretty average, at least in terms of their shape. Assessing your own physique based on the special snowflakes you see online is often just not that helpful. And from what I've seen, people make the mistake of doing so, then end up feeling disheartened, and then wrongfully write themselves off before giving themselves a chance to really get an idea of what their potential is. Like by mistakenly overlooking the first variable and simply not sticking with the process for a long enough window of time before making an inaccurate assessment. Now, this all being said, there are some truly impressive and inspirational individuals on social media who I think are worth following and learning from. I'm talking about individuals who have accomplished their physiques perhaps in part from having incredible top-tier genetics, but perhaps also from sticking with the process for years and doing so with a high level of skill. In other words, training and eating in a way that's conducive with their muscular development. The key, however, is to aim to seek some inspiration from them and learn from them if possible, and not to fall into writing yourself off from an unrealistic comparison of yourself with them. I know this can be tough though, that's for sure, as it's something I know I've struggled with in the past. At the same time, however, one of the best ways of learning is to learn from those who are ahead of you, who are more developed, more skilled. Again, I would just make sure not to write yourself off or your genetics off or your genetic potential off preemptively. And there you have it. 3 commonly overlooked variables when it comes to assessing your genetic potential for muscle growth that often are what lead people to make wrongful assumptions of what their own genetic potential for muscle growth might be. The first is overlooking the amount of time it might take when it comes to sticking with the muscle growth process consistently before developing a real understanding of what your genetic potential might be. The second is overlooking a lack of results coming from subpar training and eating rather than coming from poor genetics. And 3 is writing yourself and your genetic potential off preemptively from unrealistically comparing yourself to the genetic elite or PED users that you find on social media. At this point, I would love to know your feedback. Let me know your thoughts, insights, questions in the comment section below. Before this video comes to a close, I want to quickly let you know about the work that I do. When I'm not making YouTube videos or Instagram content, I work full-time as an online physique coach, where I help my clients to accomplish their muscle growth and fat loss goals by optimizing their approach to strength training and nutrition, and I coach them through the process. I've been doing this work for over 7 years and love helping my clients to not only transform their bodies, but ultimately their lives. If you've been considering getting some help with accomplishing your own physique goals, feel free to hit the link in the description below, where you can learn a little bit more about the work that I do and how I can help you. You can even use that link to schedule a free video consultation with me. If you have any questions about my coaching or how I can help you, just email me at sam@jadeathletics.ca. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.